The sky was on fire. The once beautiful blue canvas of Earth now blazed with streaks of crimson and gold as the alien fleet tore through the planet's defenses. Explosions lit up the horizon, and the deafening roars of collapsing buildings echoed across the shattered landscape. Millions of lives extinguished in a heartbeat as cities crumbled, and Earth's last defenders fought desperately, knowing it was a battle they couldn't win. Above the planet, the alien command ship hovered like a dark omen, casting its shadow over the dying world. Inside, High Commander Rydell observed the carnage with cold satisfaction. Humanity, so defiant and stubborn, had finally been brought to its knees. His eyes narrowed in triumph, but one figure behind him seemed out of place amidst the cheering alien officers. Months before the invasion, Lyra had been stationed as a scout on Earth, gathering intel for the coming attack. It was there she had met him, Ethan, a human soldier with a quiet strength that had drawn her in. They were enemies, yes, but in those fleeting moments when their paths crossed, they became something else. Two beings caught in a war they had no power to stop. They had shared only a handful of encounters, words spoken in hushed whispers, brief touches in the dead of night, and a promise that they both knew would be broken. When the invasion orders finally came, Ethan had told her to leave, to never come back. He had seen the cruelty of her people and knew what would happen, and yet she stayed. Lyra turned away from the command deck, heart heavy with guilt and grief. The other officers were too caught up in their celebration to notice as she slipped out. Making her way to her private quarters, she placed a trembling hand on her abdomen. It had only been a few weeks since she'd left Earth, but she already knew the truth. She was carrying Ethan's child. It was an abomination by her people's standards. A hybrid, neither fully human nor alien. If anyone found out, the consequences would be deadly. For both of them. But Lyra didn't care. This child was all that was left of Ethan, of the man she had loved. A man who had fought to his last breath to protect his world. A man whose people were now being erased from existence. She would keep the child safe, even if it meant betraying her father, her people, and everything she had ever known. Raising Cale in secret was a constant battle. Lyra moved from one hidden place to another, always one step ahead of her people's prying eyes. She fed him stories of humanity, of bravery and resilience, of a world that had once flourished with life. Kyle listened in awe, his young mind absorbing every tale of his father's people. But as he grew, so did the danger. His human features became more pronounced, his questions sharper. Why couldn't he leave their hidden home? Why did she always look so sad when she spoke of Earth? Lyra deflected as best she could, training him in combat and survival, teaching him both human and alien techniques. Kyle showed a natural talent for both, his hybrid nature giving him an edge neither species could match. He was stronger, faster, and more resilient. But Lyra knew it wouldn't be enough if they were ever discovered. She couldn't protect him forever. One evening, Kyle, now a teenager, overheard a conversation that would change everything. He had snuck out, curious about the new voices he'd heard in their usually quiet refuge. What he found made his blood run cold. Two alien officers, discussing the war that had ended years ago. The war that had wiped out Earth. I heard Commander Rydell personally ordered the final bombardment. One sneered. Every last human wiped out, even the stubborn ones. Cale's heart pounded in his chest. His mother had never told him what really happened to his father, to his people. Rage boiled in his veins, his fists clenching at his sides. The officers continued, oblivious to the figure hidden in the shadows. Pathetic creatures. They should have surrendered, but no, they had to resist until the end. Cale turned and fled back to his mother, anger and pain swirling inside him. When he confronted her, Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. She told him everything. How his father had died in the last battle. How she had tried to save as many humans as she could, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. You are the last of them, Cale, she whispered, voice trembling. But you are also more. You are my son, and you can be the weapon they never saw coming. That night, Cale swore vengeance for his father, for his people, for every life that had been snuffed out. He would make them pay, every single one of them. As Cale stared out into the night sky, a newfound determination hardening his gaze. Lyra watched him silently, fear and hope warring in her heart. He was ready. But what would become of him when he set out on this path? Would he remain the last human, or become something far more dangerous? The planet of Zyril, homeworld of Lyra's people, was a harsh, cold place. Its violet skies and jagged terrain were a far cry from the images Cale had seen of Earth in the holograms his mother showed him. Zyrelians were a warlike race, valuing strength, ruthlessness, and purity of bloodline above all else. For an outsider like Kale, who was neither fully Xyrelian nor human, fitting in was impossible. He stood in a small clearing behind their secluded home, surrounded by thick, thorn-covered trees. Kale's body, taller and leaner than most Xyrelian males, was covered in sweat as he swung a heavy blade through the air, practicing the combat techniques Lyra had drilled into him. His alien strength, inherited from his mother, combined with his human agility, made him a formidable fighter, even at a young age. But despite his talents, he was an outcast, a half-breed, as the others sneeringly called him whenever they dared to approach. Even though no one knew his true heritage, they sensed he was different, and in a society that valued conformity and dominance, different was dangerous. Kale sheathed the blade and took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. He knew his mother was right to keep him hidden. The day they discovered what he truly was would be the day they hunted him down. Later that night, Kale found his mother in the underground chamber beneath their home, a secret hideout Lyra had built long ago, accessible only through a hidden hatch. The chamber's walls were lined with human artifacts she had salvaged during the war, pieces of broken armor, faded photographs, and books that detailed humanity's history and values. This room was his sanctuary, a link to a world he had never known. "Why do you keep these things?" Kyle asked, running his fingers over an old photo of a human city, New York, his mother had called it. "It's all gone now. There's no one left to remember." Lyra turned, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a holographic projector. "Because you need to remember, Kyle. Humanity may be gone, but its spirit, its strength, it lives on in you." She activated the projector, and a hologram of Earth appeared, ruined but unmistakably beautiful. Kyle's breath hitched as he saw it for the first time. The blue oceans, the towering mountains, the sprawling cities, all gone, reduced to ash and rubble. "They took it from us," she murmured, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your father, your people, they fought to the end. And for what? So those monsters could claim our world as theirs?" Kale clenched his fists, a familiar anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'll make them pay," he growled, "for all of it." Lyra nodded slowly. "One day, Kale, but not now. First, you must be strong. Strong enough to stand against them all." The next few weeks passed in a blur of relentless training. Lyra pushed Kale harder than ever before, teaching him everything she knew about both human and Xyrelian combat. He learned to wield human blades with finesse and master alien weapons with brutal efficiency. His mother's strength and speed flowed through his veins, but his human resilience and adaptability made him something more, something unstoppable. One evening, after an especially grueling session, Lyra took Kyle aside. Her face was pale, her usually fierce eyes clouded with something he had never seen before. "Fear. Kale, I have something for you," she said quietly, reaching into a hidden compartment in the wall. She pulled out a small, metallic pendant, its surface etched with unfamiliar symbols. Kale stared at it, confused. "This belonged to your father," she whispered. Placing it in his hands, "He gave it to me the night before the invasion. It's a reminder, a promise, that even in the darkest times, you are never alone." Kyle swallowed hard, his fingers curling around the pendant's cool surface. "Why are you giving this to me now?" "Because things are changing," she said softly. "They're watching us, Kyle. They suspect something. I can't protect you forever." Panic flared in his chest. "What are you talking about? You're the best warrior they have. No one can touch you." Lyra smiled sadly. "Not when it comes to their laws. They'll kill me, Kyle, for treason, for having you, and they'll come after you next." "No," he snarled, shaking his head. "I won't let them." "You don't have a choice," she said gently, cupping his face. "You're not strong enough to face them yet, but you will be. Take this, and remember what you are. Remember what they took from you." Tears burned in Kale's eyes as he looked at the pendant, its surface gleaming softly in the dim light. His father's last gift, his mother's final hope. "I won't forget," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'll make them pay." Lyra nodded, a fierce pride in her gaze. "I know you will." But they never got the chance to finish their preparations. One night, Kyle awoke to the sound of footsteps, heavy, armored footsteps. He bolted upright, heart racing as the door to their home crashed open and a squad of Xyrelian soldiers poured in. "Mother!" he shouted, scrambling to his feet. Lyra appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. "Run, Kale!" she screamed, drawing her blade. "Get out of here, now!" But he didn't move. He couldn't. He watched in horror as the soldiers surrounded his mother, weapons raised. One of them, a tall figure clad in black armor, stepped forward. "Lyra of House Rydell, you are hereby accused of treason against the Xyrelian Empire. For the crime of harboring a human hybrid and conspiring against your people, You will be executed. No! Kyle roared, lunging forward, but a blast of energy knocked him back. He slammed into the wall, pain flaring through his body. Leave him, the commander sneered. He's just a child. Kyle struggled to his feet, vision blurred. No, please. But Lyra met his gaze, her eyes blazing with defiance. Go, Kyle. Live. Fight. And then, before he could react, she turned her blade on herself. A flash of light, a sickening sound, and she was gone. No! Kyle screamed, staggering forward as the soldiers laughed. But they didn't see what he saw. The look in her eyes, the silent message she left behind. Live, fight, survive. Kyle collapsed to the ground, his vision darkening. As consciousness slipped away, he clutched the pendant in his hand. His mother's words echoing in his mind. One day, they would pay. One day, he would return. When Kale awoke, he was alone. The soldiers were gone. His home was in ruins, and his mother's body was nowhere to be found. For a moment, despair threatened to crush him. But then he looked down at the pendant, its metallic surface, cold against his skin. Live, fight, survive. He forced himself to his feet, pain lancing through his limbs. He couldn't stay here. They would come back. They would hunt him down. But if he ran, if he hid, he could become something they feared. Steeling himself, Kale activated the hidden passage his mother had shown him long ago. It led to a small hangar, where a stolen Zarelian ship waited. With a grim determination, he boarded the craft and set the coordinates for the only place he knew he could go. Somewhere out there, the remnants of humanity still existed, and he would find them. For his father, for his mother, for the people who had been lost. Kale Rydell would become the last human and the galaxy's worst nightmare. As the ship's engines roared to life, Kale stared out at the stars, the pendant clutched tightly in his hand. I'll come back for you, he whispered to the darkness. I'll make them all pay. The stolen Zarelian ship shuddered as Kale adjusted its course, steering it away from the patrol routes of his people. He'd spent the last few days dodging detection, navigating the uncharted regions of space, fueled by sheer willpower and the burning need for revenge. But now, exhaustion clawed at him. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. Come on, hold together, he muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the flickering dashboard. The ship's power reserves were nearly depleted, and he was far from any known outpost. Alone, in the cold emptiness of space, he felt more isolated than ever. Memories of his mother's death haunted him. If he closed his eyes, he could still see her face, defiant until the end. But he couldn't give in to despair. She died so he could live, so he could fight, and he would, no matter what it took. Suddenly, the ship's sensors beeped urgently, jolting him back to the present. A massive alien cruiser loomed ahead, blocking his path. Its sleek, black hull bore the markings of the Zarelian Empire, the same fleet that had destroyed his home. Kyle's hands tightened on the controls, but he forced himself to stay calm. If they detected him now, he'd be dead before he could even think of fighting back. Heart pounding, he activated the ship's cloaking device, holding his breath as the cruiser drifted past. Seconds ticked by like hours, and Kale remained perfectly still until the massive vessel finally disappeared from view. Close one, he breathed, slumping back in his seat. But he knew it wouldn't be the last. He needed allies, resources, somewhere to hide while he plotted his revenge. It took weeks of aimless travel before Kale stumbled upon the rebel outpost. Hidden within the shadow of a dense asteroid belt, the small camouflaged base was nearly impossible to detect. But Kale's instincts led him there, his mother's pendant glowing faintly, as if guiding. He approached cautiously, sending a coded message in a language that had been dead for years. It was a gamble. If the base belonged to an enemy, he'd be signing his own death warrant. But the reply that came back made his heart leap. Identify yourself, human. Kyle exhaled sharply. They spoke English. This is Kale Rydell, he replied. I'm looking for the human resistance. There was a long pause. Then the base's hangar doors slowly slid open, revealing a motley group of humans and aliens staring at his ship. He landed carefully, stepping out onto the platform with his hands raised. Who are you? A grizzled man demanded. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. Kyle swallowed hard. The last of my kind. I'm here to finish what they started. The man's eyes widened. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Whispers of disbelief and awe filled the air. Is it true? Someone asked. He's the one, Lyra's son? Yes, Kale said quietly. And I've come to make the Zarelians pay. The murmur grew louder, a mix of fear and hope. One of the rebels, an elderly woman with a scar running down her face, stepped forward. Lyra saved many of us during the war. If you are truly her son, then you have our loyalty. Kale looked around, taking in the faces of those who had survived the Zarelian purge. They were scarred, broken, but not defeated. He felt a surge of pride. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Then let's give them hell, he said softly. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Kyle threw himself into the resistance, using his unique skills to train the fighters, strategize assaults, and rally support. His presence became a beacon of hope, his very existence proof that humanity hadn't been completely erased. Rumors of the last human spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Whispers of a human warrior with alien blood who fought with the strength of a Xyrelian and the resolve of a human. To some, he was a symbol of resistance. To others, a harbinger of doom. The small skirmishes he led quickly turned into victories. Supply convoys were ambushed. Xyrelian patrols were decimated, and outposts once thought impregnable fell to his guerrilla tactics. Kyle's forces were small, but they fought with a ferocity that terrified even the most seasoned Xyrelian soldiers. But it wasn't enough. "We need more allies," Kyle said one night, leaning over a map of the galaxy. "If we want to take the fight to the Xyrelian heart, we can't do it alone. We could try the Kavar," one of his lieutenants suggested. "They've been oppressed by the Xyrelians for centuries." Kale nodded slowly. The Kavar were powerful warriors, known for their brutal close combat techniques. If he could win them over— "Do it," he said. "Send a message. Tell them the last human wants an alliance." The Kavar weren't easy to convince. Kale traveled to their hidden sanctuary, a fortress carved into the side of a massive asteroid, and faced their leader in a brutal trial by combat. It was a test of strength, endurance, and willpower. He emerged bloodied but victorious, his human resilience pushing him beyond what any Xyrelian could match. "You are different," the Kavar warlord rumbled, eyeing Kale with grudging respect. "Not quite human, not quite Xyrelian, but you fight like a beast." "I'm fighting for my people," Kale replied, breathing hard, "and I'll do whatever it takes to free them." The warlord grunted. "Then we will join you. But if you fail, if you show weakness, we will crush you." Kyle met his gaze without flinching. "I won't fail." With the Kavar on his side, Kyle's forces grew rapidly. Word of his alliance spread, drawing more oppressed species to his cause. It was time to make his presence known. They chose a remote Xyrelian outpost, a seemingly insignificant station on the edge of the Empire, but its destruction would send a clear message. The battle was swift and brutal. Kyle led the charge, his blade slicing through the alien guards with a precision that left even the Kavar warriors in awe. By the time the dust settled, the outpost lay in ruins, its defenders scattered. Kyle stood amidst the wreckage, blood and dust coating his armor, the symbol of humanity's vengeance. "Send the message," he ordered, his voice cold. "Tell them the last human has returned." As the news of the outpost's fall spread, the Xyrelian Empire went into a frenzy. Reports of the mysterious last human spread across their networks, causing panic and confusion, but Kale knew it was only the beginning. The true battle was yet to come. "Let me know if this works, or if you'd like any adjustments." Kale stood at the bridge of his newly acquired flagship, the Vigilance, its sleek, dark hull outfitted with both human and Kavar technology. Around him, dozens of warships, both large and small, hung in formation, his new fleet. What had started as a ragtag band of rebels was now a force to be reckoned with, but Kale's eyes remained cold and focused. This was only a small step in a much larger war. "Targets acquired, Commander," his lieutenant, Arik, announced. The hulking Kavar warrior loomed beside him, his yellow eyes glinting with anticipation. "Good," Kyle murmured, glancing at the holographic display. 3 Xyrelian supply convoys floated in the sector ahead, unaware of the danger that awaited them. Taking these out would cripple the Empire's logistics in this region, cutting off reinforcements to their outer colonies. "Attack!" Kale ordered. The fleet surged forward. Kale's heart raced as the ship streaked through the void, weapons blazing. The first convoy exploded in a shower of debris, its escorts barely managing to raise shields before being torn apart. The second tried to flee but was pinned down by Kale's heavy cruisers. The third, Kale saved for last. "Send them a message," he growled. "I want survivors to spread the word." The Vigilance's cannons lit up, sending bolts of searing energy into the convoy's engines. The Xyrelian vessels buckled under the assault, their hulls rupturing in a cascade of fire. As the enemy crew scrambled to abandon ship, Kale leaned forward, his gaze icy. "Remember this," he whispered to the fleeing ships. "The last human is here, and I won't stop until the Empire burns." After the battle, Kale returned to the war room, his mind already racing ahead. The attacks were only the beginning. Each victory was a message to the Xyrelians. You are not safe. But the key to truly hurting the Empire lay in understanding its weaknesses. "Arik," he called, and the Kavar warrior stepped forward. "Any word from our spies in the capital?" "Yes, Commander," Arik rumbled, handing him a datapad. "Our contact inside the Xyrelian High Command has sent intelligence. It's troubling." Kyle frowned and began scanning the files. What he saw made his blood run cold. "The Emperor is planning something big," he muttered. "A new weapon, some kind of biological experiment." "It's worse than that," a soft voice interrupted. Kale turned to see Talia, the human strategist who had joined them a few months ago. Her sharp green eyes flickered with unease as she stepped forward. "They've been experimenting on prisoners," she said quietly. Humans. And others. Kale's vision narrowed. What kind of experiments? Genetic manipulation, Talia replied. They're trying to create something that can counteract your unique abilities. Anger flared in his chest. Of course, the Xyrelians couldn't stand the thought of a human outmatching them. They would stoop to any level to eradicate the threat he posed. They're close, she continued. If they succeed, they could wipe us out. We need to strike now, before it's too late. Kale clenched his fists. The stakes had just been raised. If the Xyrelians finished their project, all his efforts, all his mother's sacrifices, would be for nothing. We'll hit their research facility, he decided. Destroy everything. I want their scientists begging for mercy. But as he turned away, something nagged at him. If the Empire was desperate enough to resort to such measures, it meant they feared he was making an impact. But what else were they hiding? The raid on the research facility was supposed to be a swift, surgical strike. But from the moment they dropped out of hyperspace, things went wrong. Ambush! Arik bellowed as the Vigilance lurched violently. Enemy ships poured into the sector. A wall of Xyrelian warships that dwarfed Kale's fleet. They had walked right into a trap. Evasive maneuvers! Kale barked, gripping the command console. Shields up! All units! Fall back! But it was too late. The Xyrelians had them surrounded. Blasts of energy rocked the Vigilance, and Kale's heart sank as he watched ship after ship crumble under the onslaught. How did they know? Talia shouted, panic in her voice. They shouldn't have known. Because someone told them, Kyle growled, realization dawning. He turned, eyes blazing, to the shadowy figure standing at the back of the bridge. Karn! He spat. The Xyrelian defector who had joined them months ago claiming to want to bring down the Empire merely smiled. You're clever, hybrid, Karn purred, his reptilian eyes gleaming. But not clever. With a flick of his wrist, Karn activated a device. The bridge lights flickered, and Kale felt a surge of cold dread as a force field crackled to life around him, trapping him in place. You traitorous! Arik lunged forward, but Karn's guard struck him down. Goodbye, last human, Karn sneered. Your rebellion ends here. With a final mocking bow, he disappeared, leaving Kale helpless as his fleet was torn apart around him. Get out of here! Kale roared, struggling against the force field. Retreat. Save as many as you can. But it was too late. The Xyrelians had the upper hand. One by one, his ships fell, and Kale's vision blurred with rage and grief. He had failed them. Hours later, Kale awoke in the ruins of the Vigilance, the force field gone. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to sit up, blinking against the smoke and debris. The bridge was deserted. His crew, his fleet, all gone. Commander? A weak voice crackled over the intercom. Kyle's heart leapt. Talia? We're alive, she whispered. Some of us at least, but we lost most of the fleet. Kyle closed his eyes, his chest tight. So many lives. Gone because of his recklessness. No, he whispered. It was Karn's betrayal, not yours. Silence stretched on the other end. Then, what do we do now? Kale took a deep breath, forcing himself to stand. His legs shook, but he steadied himself, anger and grief hardening into cold determination. We rebuild, he said soft, stronger, smarter. I won't let their deaths be in vain. And Karn? She asked. Kale's gaze darkened. We find him, and when we do, I'll make him wish he'd never betrayed us. It took months to recover from the ambush. But Kale's resolve never wavered. He built his forces in secret, striking at key targets with brutal precision. The Xyrelians tried to hunt him down, but he was always one step ahead, and with each victory, his legend grew. Finally, the day came when he faced the one responsible for Earth's destruction, the alien warlord who had ordered the final bombardment. Rydell, the Butcher of Earth, and Lyra's father. Kyle stood before the massive alien general, his blade gleaming in the dim light of the war room. The air crackled with tension. Rydell, Kyle said quietly, his voice filled with venom. It's time to pay for what you did, the general sneered. You think you can challenge me, hybrid? You are nothing but a failed experiment. A mistake. Kale's grip tightened. No, he said softly. I'm the last of my kind, and I'm going to make sure you remember that. The battle that followed was brutal, both combatants clashing with all the fury of 1,000 wars. But in the end, Kale stood victorious, his blade at Rydell's throat. Finish it, Rydell spat, hatred burning in his eyes, but Kale hesitated. Killing him would be too easy, too merciful. Instead, he leaned close, his voice a deadly whisper. You'll live, he murmured, to see everything you've built crumble, to see your people suffer, as mine did. Rydell's eyes widened in shock. I'm not like you, Kyle said coldly. I'm human. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the great warlord broken and defeated. As Kale left the war room, bloodied but unbroken, he knew one thing for certain. The war was far from over, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The planet Morhux, seat of Xyrelian power, loomed ahead, a fortress world surrounded by a fleet of warships, each bristling with weapons and defenses. But Kale stood undaunted on the bridge of his new flagship, Excalibur, his eyes locked on the image of the alien capital. This was it, the final push, the end of a long, bloody road that had begun with Earth's destruction. "All ships, prepare for assault," he ordered, voice calm and cold. The Allied fleet that had gathered under his banner, a patchwork of vessels from a dozen oppressed species, moved into position. The humans, the Kavar, the Selrath, and even the Vash, a race that had been on the brink of extinction, had all come together for this moment. They fought not just for revenge, but for liberation. "Commander," Talia said softly, stepping up beside him, "are you sure about this? There's no going back if we attack Morhux directly." Kyle glanced at her, his face hard and unyielding. "I'm sure. We've struck at their borders, bled them dry, and forced them to retreat. But as long as Morhux stands, the Zyrelian Empire will never stop hunting us." He looked back at the planet, his gaze burning with resolve. "Today, we end this, one way or another." "Shields up," he commanded. "All ships, charge weapons, and advance." The fleet surged forward. The Zyrelians scrambled to respond, but Kale's forces moved with precision, cutting through the first wave of defenders like a blade through flesh. Explosions rocked the void as ships collided, cannons fired, and the sky filled with the deadly dance of war. The Excalibur tore through the enemy lines, its massive plasma cannons shredding Zyrelian cruisers left and right. Kale watched the destruction unfold with grim satisfaction. This was what they deserved. This was justice. But as the battle raged, something twisted inside him, a small, nagging voice that asked, was this truly what his mother would have wanted? The Excalibur broke through the outer defenses, descending through the planet's atmosphere like an avenging angel. The capital city of Morhux spread out below them, its towering spires and fortified walls gleaming under the crimson sky. Kale's heart hammered as he stared at the palace at the city's center, the heart of the Zyrelian Empire, and the place where his mother had been born. "Deploy ground forces," he ordered. "I want the palace secured." Troop transports launched from the fleet, descending onto the city in waves. Kale moved like a ghost through the smoke and fire, cutting down Zyrelian soldiers who dared to stand in his way. His blade gleamed with every strike, each swing a deadly promise. As he pushed deeper into the palace, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway, a tall, regal Zyrelian clad in gold armor. The alien woman stared at him with eyes so similar to his mother's that Kale faltered, his blade lowering. "Mother," he whispered. "No, human." She spat, stepping forward. "I am your grandmother." Kale's breath caught in his throat. This was Lyra's mother, the one who had cast her out, the one who had condemned her for loving a human. "I am Neris, matriarch of the Zyrelian Empire," she declared coldly, "and I will not allow a filthy hybrid to desecrate our legacy." She raised her blade, a shimmering energy sword that hummed with deadly power. Kyle raised his own in response, his heart a tumult of rage and sorrow. They clashed in a blur of motion, the corridor filling with the sound of metal on metal. "You destroyed my family," Kyle growled, his blade sparking against hers. "You took everything from me. And your mother took everything from us," Neris snarled. "She was weak. She let human filth taint our bloodline. I should have ended her myself." Fury roared through Kyle, and he slammed his blade down, forcing her back. "You're wrong," he hissed. "She was stronger than all of you, stronger than you could ever be." With a final brutal swing, he disarmed her, sending her sword clattering across the floor. Neris fell to her knees, staring up at him in shock. "Finish it," she whispered, voice trembling. Kale froze. This was it. This was his chance to end it all, to avenge his mother, his father, and the countless lives lost. But as he looked into Neris's eyes, he saw not the cruel tyrant he had imagined, but a broken woman, twisted by hatred and fear. Killing her would be too easy, too merciful. "No," he said softly, lowering his blade. "You're not worth it." Her eyes widened. "You dare." "I dare," he whispered, "because I'm not like you. I'm more than just vengeance." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Neris kneeling in the rubble. Kale pushed deeper into the palace, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He had come here to destroy, to bring the Zyrelians to their knees. But as he moved through the halls, seeing the fear in the eyes of the soldiers and servants who cowered before him, a terrible realization settled over him. He had become what he hated. Was this what his mother had wanted? Was this the legacy his father would be proud of? To be a destroyer, a bringer of death? He reached the throne room at last, the massive doors swinging open to reveal the Zyrelian Emperor himself, a towering figure clad in obsidian armor, his eyes burning with malice. "So," the Emperor rumbled, his voice echoing through the empty chamber, "the last human comes to claim his revenge." Kyle raised his blade, but the words caught in his throat. I didn't come for revenge," the Emperor sneered. Then why are you here, boy? To beg for mercy? No. Kyle took a deep breath, his gaze steady. I came to end the cycle. The Emperor laughed, the sound harsh and grating. End the cycle? You think you can end this war with words? I can end it with a choice, Kale said softly. I can kill you, like I've killed so many others. Or I can show the galaxy that humans are more than just monsters. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. You'd spare me after everything? No. Kale's gaze hardened. But I won't let hatred rule me either. He stepped back, lowering his blade. I won't become like you. Silence filled the throne room. The Emperor stared at Kale, disbelief and rage warring in his gaze. Then, slowly, he sank to his knees. You think you're better than me, hybrid? He snarled. You're weak. No, Kyle whispered, his voice firm. I'm strong enough to know when to stop. He turned away, leaving the Emperor kneeling in the empty throne room. As he stepped out into the ruined palace courtyard, the sun breaking through the clouds, Kale felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had come here for revenge, but he had found something far more valuable: redemption. The war ended that day. With the Emperor's surrender, the Zarelian Empire crumbled. Kale's forces swept through the remaining strongholds, offering terms of peace and rebuilding instead of bloodshed. It was not an easy road. There were those who resisted, those who saw Kale as a weakling for not wiping out his enemies completely. But slowly, steadily, the galaxy began to change. Kale became a symbol, not of vengeance, but of hope. The last human, the one who had chosen mercy over destruction. And as the galaxy looked upon his deeds, they began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, humanity's true legacy was not war, but something far greater. Years later, Kale stood on the bridge of the Excalibur, staring out at the stars. The galaxy was still healing, but there was hope now, a hope that he had helped create. Mother, he whispered, touching the pendant around his neck. I did it! I didn't become like them! I found a way to be human. As he turned away, the stars glimmered in the distance, a new dawn rising over the galaxy. The last human had won, and now it was time to build a new future.